Welcome to Downtown Sports. My name is Downtown Steven Brown, and in today's video, guys, the season preview for the 2021-2022 Toronto Maple Leafs. But before we get into that, we got to go over some roster things that the team did over the Thanksgiving weekend in preparation for opening night on Wednesday. If you were watching the Maple Leafs' final preseason game against the Ottawa Senators on Saturday, you'd know that Ilya Mikheyev left the game with a hand injury, and Sheldon Keefe updated the media afterwards, saying that it would be longer term. Because this is more or less what the Toronto Maple Leafs' lineup was looking like heading into opening night before Ilya Mikheyev had gotten injured. And these were the lines going into that final preseason game against the Ottawa Senators. They seemed pretty content on giving Ilya Mikheyev at least a chance to start the season in the Maple Leafs' top six, playing next to John Tavares and William Nylander. And if you noticed that Austin Matthews wasn't in that lineup for Saturday night's game against the Senators, it was because he's still recovering from off-season wrist surgery and he hasn't played any of the preseason games so far. And the latest from Sheldon Keefe was on October the 8th, saying that he's more or less a day-to-day. He hasn't been ruled in for the season opener against the Montreal Canadiens, but he hasn't been ruled out either. Hopefully he plays in that Thursday game in Ottawa because I'm going to be there and I want to see Austin Matthews. And if he's day-to-day at this point, you just have to know that people are going to come back to their original reaction to when it was announced that Austin was even having surgery in the first place, and that's why didn't it happen sooner? But if you had bothered to read at all what he said about his own injury in a September interview with Sportsnet, he said that it was progressing well into the offseason and it was something that he had hoped would heal on his own. But as he ramped up his offseason training, it was evident that that wasn't going to be the case. And if you know the start date of training camp, right about the beginning of October, you count back about 6 weeks from there, there's your deadline. If it's not better by then you're having surgery. And that's exactly what the team and him did. The update as I'm editing the video here is that Matthews is not on any specific line, and that could indicate that he may not be ready to go in time for opening night. Fingers crossed still on that Thursday game, but it really is day to day. You don't want to read too much into it. You don't want to downplay it either. But going back to the Ilya Mikheyev injury, because it's not just as simple as losing Ilya Mikheyev. There are short-term implications to the roster created by his injury, and there are also long-term implications that we will talk about that really suck. The short-term implications is that Ilya Mikheyev is more than likely going to be placed on long-term injury reserve to start the season, which would give the Maple Leafs enough cap space to carry a 22-man roster instead of a 21-man roster, which would allow them to carry an extra defenseman and an extra forward. The extra forward being Michael Amadio, who won the final spot over Adam Brooks, who was placed on waivers yesterday. But there could be a strategy in that, and I'll explain. Because there were over 20 guys placed on waivers yesterday in an attempt for teams to be salary cap compliant for today's deadline. So if there was ever a day to try to sneak someone through on waivers, it was yesterday. And Adam Brooks probably does get lost in the flurry of names here. And if you're comparing the two players, they're pretty much both fringe NHLers at this point in their careers, but they're both 25 years old. In fact, they're only separated by about a week or so in terms of age. And if you're looking at their careers to this point, Adam Brooks has only played 18 games in the NHL, but Michael Amadio's played 173. They're both centermen, but I believe Michael Amadio brings some penalty killing experience, so that is some extra versatility. And the thing to remember about long-term injury reserve is that it is not subtracting that player's cap hit. It is adding to the cap ceiling that team has to work with for the duration that the player is on LTIR. And another important thing to remember about it is that you either use it or you lose it. So in the case of the Toronto Maple Leafs and Ilya Mikheyev starting the season on LTIR, they want to be exceeding the salary cap as close to his $1.645 million cap hit as they possibly can be. And if you were confused by that $111,884 number that was under the cap space there in the previous clip, I don't believe that is space that the Maple Leafs have access to. Because before the Maple Leafs placed Ilya Mikheyev on LTIR, they would have about $80,217 worth of cap space. But after placing him on LTIR, his replacements, Michael Amadio and Timothy Liljegren, add up to just short of his $1.645 million cap hit. And you only gain access to by what you exceed the cap by. So that $111,884 number is the sum of the difference between Ilya Mikheyev's cap hit and what Amadio and Liljegren add up to, as well as the $80,000 that they would have had in space if Mikheyev was not placed on LTIR at all. if the Toronto Maple Leafs had another waiver-exempt player who had a higher cap hit than Timothy Liljegren, then that player would have probably been on the opening day roster so that they would have had access to more of Ilya Mikheyev's cap space. None of that is really too important, but there are people who care to know the minutia behind things. The long-term consequences of this injury is that it makes it very difficult to make in-season trades while using LTIR because you cannot accumulate or accrue cap space. So if you were looking ahead to what the Maple Leafs could possibly do at this year's trade deadline, it doesn't look like they're going to be able to afford a whole lot right now. Unless you want to look at moving money off of the roster, and then you can kind of see their $3.5 million fourth line center, and you can see where that money can maybe come from. But they went to great lengths to protect that player from the Seattle expansion draft to still have him on the roster now. So to trade him, obviously it would depend on the player that you would be getting back, might be a little bit disappointing. You know, that may be where he starts, but maybe not necessarily where he ends every game because the lines are fluid and you can switch things up on the fly. Maybe they want to give other players some other opportunities to play in other roles and they're playing him there because they know what they can expect from him. I don't know. There are only so many ways that you can justify having a fourth line center make $3.5 million on the Toronto Maple Leafs. We're just going to have to keep an eye on this situation and see how it progresses as the season goes on. One thing I pointed out in the offseason is that the majority of the money owed to him is already paid off. So if a cash-strapped team is looking for a player like Kerfoot, he can have value in a trade. But moving on from the numbers, it does look like Jack Campbell is going to get the start in net for the Toronto Maple Leafs on opening night against the Montreal Canadiens, and Peter Mrazek will follow on Thursday in the second half of the back-to-back. JFresh Hockey on Twitter put together a bunch of graphics of all the different predictive models predicting each division, and I will leave a link to his Patreon and his Twitter in the description because I do use his stats from time to time. All 10 of these predictive models have the Toronto Maple Leafs finishing no lower than second in the Atlantic Division, and 4 of them have them finishing in first, ahead of the Tampa Bay Lightning. Dom's model has them finishing second best in the NHL, only behind the Colorado Avalanche and first in the Atlantic Division, but it's important to understand how these models work and what you're seeing on the screen. He runs these simulations 10,000 times. Them finishing first is only the outcome 51% of the time. That means 49% of the time, something different happens. And JFresh Hockey sharing a more in-depth, numbers-based season preview with how the Maple Leafs rank in various categories around the league. I think something that you can either overrate or underrate when it comes to the Toronto Maple Leafs is their goaltending. And you can overrate it by downplaying both goalies' injury history, but you can underrate it by not taking into account how good both goalies have been the last couple of seasons. And while the Maple Leafs don't have that clear-cut top 5, maybe even top 10 starter, they have 2 very, very good goalies who should give the Maple Leafs overall solid goaltending. That may come back to bite them come playoff time when it is definitely quality over quantity, but we've had the quality over quantity for a number of years now, and it hasn't necessarily worked out, whether the player has dealt with injury or just hasn't caught in a hot streak at the proper time. From EvolvingHockey.com or Evolving Wild on Twitter, goalies in the NHL over the last 2 seasons sorted by goals above replacement per 60. In this sample size, Jack Campbell is 11th in the NHL and Peter Mrazek is 15th. And I stress per 60 there because, like I said, you can overrate them or underrate them if you're not taking into account the numbers and their health. So it's going to be interesting to see how that tandem kind of grows and progresses as the season goes along because it has big, big upside potential and it also has the potential to be a complete disaster, but I don't want to talk about that in the season preview. Ultimately, I think the thing that you can take away from this is that you need to play the games to find out what's actually going to happen. It's like I've been kind of saying, no, the Leafs are not perfect, but neither are the other teams in their division. The Florida Panthers have a very highly touted rookie goalie in net. He could perform really well and continue off of the success that he started last year, but he could also struggle. You know, you look at other young goalies in the league, like a guy like Carter Hart. He struggled a lot last season. It is possible. Sergei Bobrovsky behind him can either be the worst goalie in the league or win the Vezina Trophy. There are ups and downs in that team. If you're looking at a team like the Boston Bruins, they lose David Krejci in the offseason, and their center depth is not as good as what it used to be. If you asked me a couple of weeks ago where I thought the Toronto Maple Leafs were going to finish in the Atlantic Division, I would have told you that my brain was saying third and my heart was saying fourth. I just wasn't as in it a couple of weeks ago. But after doing some more videos the last couple of weeks and doing some more research and looking into the numbers, I'm going to be there on Thursday. I'm back in it to win it, baby. My heart is saying second and my brain is saying third. So hopefully you'll all come along with me for the inevitable ups and downs that will be the 2021-2022 season for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Because like I've said for a really long time, the end result, the outcome of the end result will be deserved, no matter what it is, win or lose. And I'm not saying win like they got to win the cup or anything like that. I mean, that would be nice. But let's see some step forwards. Second, third round. I don't know. I guess we're just going to have to wait for puck drop. So that's going to be it for this video, guys. Make sure to like the video if you did like and subscribe for more, because more is always on the way. Wednesday night.